Welcome to Paranormal Passion, the podcast that intertwines the eerie with the erotic. Join your hosts, Sarah and Jay, as they take you on a thrilling journey through spooky short stories that will give you chills and tantalize your senses. Each episode delves into the world of the supernatural through tales that explore the passion lurking just beyond the veil of the ordinary. Whether it's seductive specters or cryptid caresses, Paranormal Passion promises a delightful mix of spine-tingling suspense and sultry storytelling. Tune in, turn off the lights, and prepare for an unforgettable experience that will leave you breathless and wanting more. Please keep in mind that Paranormal Passion is intended for adult audiences, as it can get quite spicy. Listener discretion is advised. Thanks for tuning in to the very first episode of Paranormal Passion. And what better time to launch our passion project than Valentine's Day? In keeping with the spirit of the season, we have planned a very special episode for our debut. Valentine's Day is all about creating cherished memories with the ones we hold dear. But what happens when, despite our best intentions for a perfect romantic evening, fate intervenes in unexpected ways? In today's episode, we share the haunting tale of two lovers whose Valentine's plans take a tragic turn. Will their love transcend even the boundaries of death? Sit back, relax, and immerse yourself in a world where passion meets the paranormal. Join us as we uncover the chilling tale, Heartstrings and Hunger. Valentine's Day was supposed to be their beginning, but fate had other plans. Elena and Marcus had been together for 6 years, a love story so perfect it bordered on cliché. They met during her first gallery exhibit, where Marcus had wandered in, lost on his way to a meeting. His suit was impeccable, his tie slightly askew, and his curiosity about the abstract painting she displayed was endearingly genuine. What began as an impromptu discussion about art turned into hours at a coffee shop down the street, and by the end of the night, Elena knew she had met someone extraordinary. Marcus was a dreamer, wrapped in the guise of a pragmatist. By day, he worked as an architect, designing buildings that seemed to breathe and live within their surroundings. By night, he indulged in his passion for history and folklore, a habit that often led to stacks of dusty books and impromptu lectures about ancient rituals performed by primitive civilizations. Elena loved his duality, the way his mind could leap from structural blueprints to tales of forgotten gods in an instant. He, in turn, adored her fiery independence and the way she poured her soul into her art, capturing emotions he struggled to put into words. Their love grew steadily, weathering long nights, creative frustrations, and even a brief separation when Marcus's work took him to Paris for 6 months. It was during one of their rare arguments that Marcus had blurted out,
"You're my forever, Elena. Don't you see that?"
The words lingered between them, heavy and raw, a truth neither had spoken aloud, but both had always known. Forever. It wasn't just a declaration, it was a promise, one forged in the quiet moments they shared, and the unshakable bond they had built over time. This Valentine's Day was supposed to be the culmination of that promise. Marcus had planned every detail with meticulous care. A private dinner at the rooftop garden of one of their favorite restaurants, followed by a trip to the gallery where they had first met, and where Elena's newest collection was on display. And at the end of the night, beneath the city's skyline, he planned to propose, with a ring he had carried in his pocket for weeks. But fate's wheel had already been set in motion. On their way to dinner, with the ring box snugly hidden in the inner pocket of his suit, a car suddenly swerved into their lane, driven recklessly by someone who was clearly drunk. Marcus, ever vigilant, reacted instantly, yanking the wheel and narrowly avoiding disaster.
What an idiot!
He growled, slamming his hand against the horn, his jaw clenched with frustration, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. That was close, Marcus. Be careful, Elena said softly, her voice steady and soothing. A sly smile played on her lips as she added, Looks like some people are drunk on love tonight. She reached over, her fingers brushing gently against the back of his neck, her touch melting away some of his tension. Marcus glanced at her briefly, his sharp edges softened under her gaze. He switched lanes to coast safely behind a transport, and remained in that lane until they were just about to reach their exit. The driver of the transport must have realized too late that their exit was his as well. The truck veered into a hard right in front of them as it was already passing the exit. It bounced and swayed as it rolled over the raised median between the highway and exit. The abrupt motion caused the metal supports it was carrying to jostle menacingly under their restraints. One broke free, tumbling backward towards the couple's car. In a final, desperate act, Marcus wrenched the wheel, veering the car onto the shoulder of the off-ramp. His sole instinct was to shield Elena, positioning himself between her and the falling strut as it hurtled towards them. She grasped his hand, his eyes meeting hers, and then her world went dark. Elena woke in the hospital hours later. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the beeping of monitors were the first sensations to register. Then there was pain. It surged through her body, sharp and unrelenting, as she struggled to piece together where she was. She was searching through the fog clouding her mind when it all came rushing back. The screech of tires, Marcus's hand clutching hers tightly, their eyes locking in a final, desperate exchange of love and fear. And finally, the deafening crash, followed by the all-consuming darkness that took her away from him. Panic hit her like a crashing wave. Her breath quickened, ragged and shallow, as she forced her eyes open, the sterile white light of the hospital room blinding her. What had happened to Marcus? Where was he? She hammered on the call button to summon a nurse to her room. She groaned, the ache in her chest competing with the chaos in her mind. A nurse appeared by her bedside. Her expression was calm but cautious.
You're awake. Please try to relax,
the nurse said gently, her hands steadying Elena as she struggled to sit up. No, Elena rasped, her voice hoarse and trembling. What happened? Where's Marcus? The nurse hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line.
Let's focus on your recovery right now.
No! Elena's voice cracked as she tried to shout, her panic swelling uncontrollably. Tell me, where is he? What happened to him? The nurse glanced at the monitors, checking Elena's vitals and trying to avoid her desperate gaze. After a moment, she spoke, her voice heavy with reluctance.
I'm so sorry, but Marcus didn't survive the accident.
The words hit Elena like a punch to the gut, robbing her of air. No, he can't be, she cried, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her face. "Tell me what happened. I need to know." The nurse reached for her, trying to calm her.
Please, you need to rest. This isn't good for you.
"Tell me!" Elena screamed, thrashing against the bed, her anguish spiraling into hysteria. The nurse's expression tightened with regret as she reached for the IV.
I'm sorry,
she whispered. Before Elena could protest further, the nurse injected something into the line. The sedative took hold quickly, pulling Elena back into the suffocating darkness. Her cries faded, replaced by a silence as heavy as the grief now etched into her soul. Elena spiraled in the days that followed. Their apartment had become a mausoleum of memories. Marcus's sketches of conceptual buildings remained scattered across his desk. His favorite coffee mug still sat in the sink. She couldn't bring herself to touch any of it, as if disturbing the objects would make his absence more real. Friends and family tried to comfort her, but their words felt hollow. How could they understand the void that his love had left behind? As the days turned to weeks, her grief hardened into something sharper. Elena became consumed by the idea that Marcus couldn't truly be gone. Their love was too powerful, too enduring to end with something as mundane as death. Her search for answers led her to his study, where she found the book that would change everything. Though she did not recognize it at first, the memories quickly poured into her mind as she picked up the heavy tome. Bound in cracked, weathered leather and filled with pages etched in strange, arcane symbols, the book was a relic Marcus had stumbled upon during their trip to Prague, a city steeped in ancient mysticism. He had found it in a dimly lit shop tucked into the labyrinthine alleys of Old Town, just a stone's throw from the astronomical clock. The shop seemed almost designed to be overlooked, its windows layered with years of grime, obscuring the treasures within. She recalled that just the sight of the storefront had sent a shiver down her spine. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged paper, wax, and something more elusive, a tang of incense or herbs, perhaps. Shelves bowed under the weight of forgotten tomes and peculiar trinkets, and the shopkeeper, a wizened man with piercing gray eyes, greeted the foreign couple with an enigmatic smile. While Elena warily browsed the shelves, Marcus had been drawn to the book immediately. Its cracked leather cover bearing the faint imprint of symbols he couldn't quite recognize. When he opened it, the yellow pages revealed diagrams of rituals, strange sigils, and densely packed text in Latin and other languages his years of study could not identify. The shopkeeper, noticing his fascination, spoke in a low, knowing tone.
This book is no ordinary relic. It's said to be a grimoire, one of a kind, rumored to bridge the worlds of the living and the dead,
he explained. His words were laced with the kind of mystique that made Marcus laugh nervously. Marcus had bought the book on impulse, half joking that he'd use it to summon good fortune for their engagement, a playful tease that had been his first slip about the plans he was making for their future together. Elena had rolled her eyes when he showed her the odd purchase, laughing at the absurdity of it, but Marcus had tucked it into his suitcase like a treasure nonetheless. Now, the book felt like far more than a curiosity. It was a lifeline, something tangible to cling to in her darkest hour. Flipping through the pages, she found notes scrawled in his handwriting. hasty annotations beside the spells and rituals. Archaic symbols and verses were underlined, passages translated into shaky English, his attempts to make sense of its cryptic instructions. Among the notes were Marcus's thoughts about the veil between life and death, scribbled late at night long after she had gone to bed. The once fanciful theories and rituals now seemed to hum with potential, a dark promise etched into every faded page. Elena devoured the text, ignoring the warnings scrawled into the margins.
The price is steep. Not all who return are whole.
She didn't care. All that mattered was that there was now a chance that she could bring Marcus back to her. Weeks turned to months as her obsession grew. She researched tirelessly, reaching out to obscure forums and anonymous experts. She bought candles, herbs, and items that vendors claimed were enchanted. Her nights were spent whispering incantations, her days slipping further into isolation. Her once vivid paintings turned dark and abstract, reflecting the turmoil within her. The world outside continued, but for Elena, time had stopped. Finally, the day had come. It was Valentine's once again, and under the light of a blood moon, she was ready. Elena performed the ritual in the basement of their building, a space she had transformed into a shrine. A circle of salt enclosed Marcus's belongings: the ring, his favorite sketchbook, and a lock of his hair she had carefully saved. She chanted the words, her voice trembling with fear and hope. The air around her grew heavy, vibrating with unseen energy. A low hum filled the room, growing louder. The lock of Marcus's hair burst into flames, releasing a plume of acrid, putrid smoke that made her eyes sting and her stomach churn. Then, silence. Elena sat frozen, heart pounding as she stared at the summoning circle, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She waited, her breath held, praying for any sign that her efforts had worked. But nothing happened. Minutes turned into hours as she sat vigil, refusing to move. "It must take time," she whispered to herself, desperation lacing her voice. "I just need to be patient." The faint light of dawn crept into the basement through grime-encrusted windows, its warm glow a cruel contrast to the cold pit of despair that had grown in her chest. Elena woke on the filthy floor, her body stiff and aching. For a fleeting moment, excitement flared within her, as she remembered why she was there. But as she scanned the room, her hope crumbled. Nothing had changed. The shrine and summoning circle were undisturbed, untouched by anything otherworldly. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. Instead, there was only the suffocating weight of failure, bitter disappointment, and the sharp sting of her renewed grief. With shaking hands, she began dismantling the remnants of her hard work. The candles, the smudged chalk, and wasted salt, even the charred remains of his hair, all of it went into the trash. Only the ring and Marcus's sketchbook remained, her final, fragile ties to him. Clutching them tightly, she retreated to her apartment, her steps heavy with the crushing reality of her loss. Once inside, she sank into the solitude of her darkened room, blinds drawn to keep out the daylight. Shadows cloaked her as she replayed the events of the previous night over and over in her mind. She had done everything perfectly, followed every instruction to the letter. She had seen the hair ignite. How could it have failed? It failed because it wasn't real. A mocking voice sneered in her mind, piercing through the haze of her despair. You can't bring back the dead. The voice, sharp and biting, was her own. Her inner monologue, relentless and unforgiving, drove the dagger deeper. You were a fool to fall for the fantasy in the first place. She swallowed hard, the weight of the truth pressing down on her chest. The voice was right. She had been a fool to hope, to believe. Magic wasn't real, but death was. Marcus was gone. The fire hadn't been a sign of anything mystical. It must have been an ember, a mundane accident sparking her false hope. She clenched the ring in her fist, tears streaking her face as the cruel reality set in. He was gone. Forever. Then, a voice broke the stillness.
Elena.
A raspy voice drifted in from the hallway, faint yet unmistakable. She turned to see Marcus standing in the doorway, still wearing the suit she had selected for his burial. Tears blurred her vision. It couldn't be real. She must have been hallucinating from sleep deprivation and grief. Marcus? She whispered to the specter standing in the doorway.
It's me, Elena. I've come back,
Said the dry, gravelly voice. Blinking away tears, she looked him over, face pale and marred by smudges of what must have been grave dirt. His voice was somehow changed, but it was unmistakably him. She ran to him then, throwing herself into his arms and sobbing into his chest. He was solid, alive, but so cold. It worked! I brought you back! She whispered through her sobs, her trembling fingers tracing the familiar contours of his face. Her touch drifted lower, searching until she found his throat. The mortician had done a meticulous job, seamlessly closing the wound where the metal strut had pierced him, but the damage to his vocal cords had been done. Marcus pulled her close, his lips finding hers in a desperate, searing kiss. That first night of their reunion was nothing short of pure bliss. They spent hours lost in each other, rediscovering the love that they thought was stolen forever. The aching void her longing had carved into her soul was finally filled, again and again, until both of them collapsed into each other's arms, utterly spent. The days and nights that followed unfolded like a dream, suspended in a state of euphoria that felt almost too perfect to be real. Marcus seemed nearly unchanged. His smile, still boyish and warm, and his sweet, familiar laugh were melodies Elena had missed with an ache so deep it felt like a part of her soul had been ripped away. Now, those sounds filled their home again, casting light into the dark corners she thought would remain shadowed forever. Their days fell into a comforting rhythm, as though they had slipped effortlessly back into the life they had once shared. Mundane tasks, which had once seemed trivial, now brimmed with joy and gratitude. Cooking together became an adventure, filled with laughter and playful touches. Every small chore was a celebration, every routine task an opportunity to revel in the simple fact that they were together again. Even folding laundry felt intimate. Each moment was a reminder of the life that they had reclaimed. Elena marveled at how easily their worlds had merged once more, and Marcus, ever attentive, seemed just as grateful. When day had fallen to night, their connection deepened. shifting from the joyful simplicity of their days to an intense, all-consuming intimacy. Their bed had become an altar at which they worshipped one another, a sacred space where they could bare not only their bodies, but their souls. Their connection was electric, their bodies moving as though they had been designed to fit together, two halves of a whole that had finally been made one again. His body, though cold, felt perfect against hers, his every touch sending thrilling sparks coursing through her veins. There was an intensity about him that was fascinating and otherworldly, the way he worshipped her body, taking his time with a newfound reverence that sent shivers through her. He savored every inch of her, exploring her curves and most sensitive places with his electric, achingly precise touch. It was as though he were rediscovering her for the first time, as he displayed a devotion that made her heart race and her breath catch. The slow, tantalizing build-up of those nights was maddeningly exquisite, his teasing leaving her trembling and pleading for more. When he would finally give in to her desperate cries and bury his cold, unyielding length inside her, the sensation sent waves of pleasure coursing through them both. Their bodies writhed together in perfect sync, their moans merging in a climactic crescendo that left them gasping. Night after night, their connection deepened and became more consuming than ever before. Elena felt as if a single, fractured soul had been rejoined in their union, each moment with him reaffirming the depth of their bond. Again and again Marcus claimed her, and with each touch, kiss, and whispered word, the shattered pieces of her heart felt closer to mending. The moments shared during those nights were more than just physical. They were a desperate affirmation of their love, a celebration of the impossible gift they had been given. Wrapped within his arms, Elena couldn't imagine a world without Marcus, and she vowed to hold on to this precious time with everything she had. But as days passed, subtle differences emerged in Marcus. The first peculiar shift in his behavior came one evening when he softly asked Elena to walk around their apartment nude, or at the very least in her underwear. He pulled her close as he made his sensual request, his lips trailing playful kisses along her neck.
I just want to admire you,
he murmured, his voice a low, seductive rumble.
I came so close to losing you forever, Elena,
he added, his words heavy with earnest longing. The request seemed harmless, even endearing. She laughed it off and indulged him, brushing aside her unease as she stripped bare before him. A gleam rose in his eyes then, a hungry look that made her cheeks heat under his gaze. Those days drifted to weeks, and Marcus began tentatively returning to his blueprints and building designs, the work he had once been so passionate about. But Elena noticed he often seemed distracted. His pencil would linger idly in his hand as his eyes drifted to her, studying her body instead of the lines on the page. When he wasn't feigning work, he was utterly glued to her. Where he had once been independent, often retreating to his study for hours to work, he now seemed incapable of leaving her side. His hands were always on her, his presence constant, and his need for touch incessant. Elena dismissed the change in his behavior, telling herself it was a natural reaction to the trauma they had endured. She was grateful to have him back, even if his affection had taken on an intensity she wasn't used to. But Marcus's newfound quirks began to quickly spiral into something far more unsettling. The seam of the wound in his throat had begun to darken as his appetite for food diminished to almost nothing, and was replaced by a voracious hunger Elena could not name. He began avoiding her gaze altogether, his eyes rarely meeting hers. Instead, his focus lingered elsewhere, her chest, hips and ass, or disturbingly, directly between her legs, even during mundane conversations. But what alarmed her most was the relentless nature of his desire. His passion had transformed into something raw and overpowering, an almost primal need that seemed to consume him. It wasn't just lust, it was something darker, more feral, and it was becoming insatiable. Marcus couldn't get enough of her. He craved the heat of her body, the way her tight warmth enveloped his too cold flesh. It wasn't just a want, it was a primal need. He needed to be near her, to touch her, and feel her warmth beneath him. Every thrust into her soft, impossibly warm moistness seemed to reaffirm his renewed existence, grounding him in the present and momentarily quieting that strange hunger gnawing away at him. Over and over, he pounded into her, driven by a desperation that bordered on frenzy as he tried to placate the strange hunger. And this act of closeness, was the only way he knew how to sate it. He took every opportunity Elena allowed, his fervor consuming their once soft and sensual lovemaking, transforming it into rough, frantic sex. As the weeks turned to months, the shift in Marcus's demeanor became impossible to ignore. Elena's initial joy gave way to unease, her heart heavy with questions she couldn't bring herself to ask. Even in the haze of his desire, Marcus noticed the toll it was taking on Elena. Her exhaustion was growing, her wariness unmistakable, as his once tender intimacy routinely became a relentless blur of that primal need. He could see she was sore, her body bearing the weight of his insatiable appetite, yet he couldn't stop himself. Even as he shuddered and spilled his cold release into her warmth, he was already salivating at the thought of their next time together. Was this truly the man she had loved and brought back, or had she unleashed something else entirely?
I need more,
He confessed one night, a growl lacing his words, his eyes glinting with a strange light. "Anything you want," she said to him with as much courage as she could muster. "I'm yours." There was a sparkle of fear in her eyes as she spoke the words. Their nights bled into days, and what had once been making love became even more fevered and frantic. She clung to the act, the only bond left between them, as a desperate attempt to keep him tethered to her. Elena offered him everything, her blood, her body, her soul. But no matter how much she gave, it was never enough. His once tender caresses were now rough, his kisses left bruises, and his nails drew blood as they raked her body. Yet Elena could not refuse him, willing to endure anything to keep him by her side. And then one night, what was left of Marcus's restraint finally snapped. She woke to find him standing over her, his eyes burning with hunger as he spread her legs, preparing to force himself inside her. His hands trembled as they hovered over her naked breasts.
I'm sorry.
he whispered when he saw that her eyes were open, and drew upon what little control he had left to pull away.
I can't stay here. I can't stay with you.
He shouted the words, as much to Elena as to himself, panic rising in his voice as he realized what he was about to do to her.
If I do, I'll destroy you.
His voice broke then, as tears welled in his eyes. Then destroy me, Elena sobbed, grabbing his hands and pressing them to her chest. I can't lose you again. His anguish mirrored her own.
You don't understand, Elena. I'm not the man you brought back,
he said as tears fell down his cold cheeks.
I don't know what I am now, but I know I can't control myself.
The words morphed into a guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the dark wound in his throat, which had now split, oozing decay and reeking of rot. His grip tightened on her breasts, unable to control himself or his strength. Flesh began to tear beneath his touch as tears streamed down her face. Elena smiled up at him wistfully through blurred vision and said, You're my forever, Marcus. Don't you see that? Marcus plunged into her then, so cold and so deep, penetrating to her very core. Marcus. Elena gasped his name, her voice trembling with surrender as she gave herself over to him completely. Their final night together was a bittersweet blend of passion and sorrow, pleasure and pain. Beneath the soft glow of moonlight spilling in through the bay window, Marcus made love to Elena in the only way he knew. An aching intensity grew as each touch whispered a final goodbye. Marcus clung desperately to Elena, as though the night could stretch on forever, but deep down they both knew the truth. Their time was slipping away, along with his humanity. By dawn, Elena was gone. Well, most of her was gone. The once beautiful home they had shared together was unrecognizable, drenched in blood and viscera. The soft sounds of laughter and love that had filled the air were replaced by low, guttural growls and the sickening crunch of bone. In the corner of the bedroom, a figure crouched, bathed in the pale morning light. The source of the grotesque sounds, it gnawed hungrily on a human hand, blood dripping from its pale lips. The eyes that had once held warmth and love were now cold and empty, stripped of humanity and replaced by a predatory glow. What had once been Marcus caressed the severed hand between crunches. This was all that was left of Elena. The hunger that had been building within him had finally consumed what was left of his soul. And Elena, sweet, devoted Elena, had embraced his need, her final act of love sealing her fate. On her bloodied, lifeless hand, the engagement ring still gleamed faintly, a cruel echo of what they had hoped for, a testament to a future that would never come. Fate, however cruel and unfair, had been inevitable, weaving their love into a tragedy from which neither could escape. Thank you for joining us on this spine-tingling episode of Paranormal Passion. We hope you enjoyed our blend of eerie tales with tantalizing twists, and that we left you longing for more. Please remember that all stories you've heard are written exclusively by Sarah, crafted to take you on a thrilling journey into the unknown. Our special guest voices today include Rita Bedard and Alex Hunter, joining Sarah and Jay. Please note that these stories are not to be republished or used elsewhere without written consent from the Paranormal Passion team. Don't forget to subscribe and join us next time as we continue to explore the enticing edge of paranormal storytelling. Until then, keep your lights dimmed and your imagination alive.